The pre-referral process is the first step in the IEP process. The pre-referral is a preventative measure which is used to decrease the number of unnecessary referrals to special education. The pre-referral starts when a student has shown difficulties in behavior or academics. Members of the pre-referral team will work with the classroom teacher to choose interventions that the teacher can use in the general education classroom setting to support the student. There are 6 stages to this process, and they are done in a sequential order. In the first stage, a school staff member or the parent expresses a concern regarding the student's behavior or academic abilities. Next, the teacher works to gather information on the student in the form of observations or collecting other pieces of data. The team reconvenes to share the information and data collection, and then to discuss possible strategies and interventions the general education teacher can implement in the classroom. During stage 5, the general education teacher is responsible for beginning these interventions and monitoring their effectiveness. After a period of time, the team meets to evaluate the effectiveness of the interventions and decides if the interventions need to continue or if the student needs something more and qualifies for special education services. One tool that teachers and other school staff members can use to draw information about a student during the pre-referral process is the Riot ISO matrix. This tool helps provide teachers and school staff members with a number of sources that may help explain the student's academic or behavioral deficiencies and why the student is not able to be successful in the school environment. This data can be used to help staff members plan interventions for the student before a student receives special education services. In the Riot part of the matrix, Riot is used for potential sources of information. The R in Riot stands for a review of historical records and products. So this is looking at past information regarding the student. I stands for interview of key stakeholders. So this means interviewing parents to learn more about the student or past teachers. O means observe performance in real-time functional settings. So this is observing the student in their general education classroom setting and their behavior or in their academic abilities in this setting. T stands for testing students through careful use of appropriately matched measurement technologies. In the ISO part of the framework, I stands for instruction, which considers whether the instruction is appropriate for the student and it's targeted based on the student's needs. C stands for curriculum, which takes into consideration the student's ability and whether they have mastered certain parts of the general education curriculum. E stands for environment, and this takes into consideration the classroom setting of the student and whether this environment is helping or harming, limiting their learning ability in the classroom. And L stands for learner, which means what are the general work habits of the student in the classroom? What are their study skills like? What are their functional behaviors in the classroom? After the pre-referral process has been completed and it has been determined that a student qualifies for special education services through evaluations, the student will receive an individual education program, or an IEP. An IEP is a written plan that is developed by an IEP team based on the individual needs of a student. This plan includes a description of what supports the student will receive at school. An IEP can change annually based on the student's needs, based on changes in curriculum or technology, and based on the student's progress in school. Please take a look at the following video for more information regarding an IEP.
An IEP stands for an Individualized Education Program. And basically, what that means is that for every child with a disability living in the United States, we have an obligation to provide them with what's called a free, appropriate public education. And we do that by providing them with educational services that are individualized to their own needs through that IEP.
So an IEP is an individualized education program that a team develops based off the needs of the individual student. The ETR is the driving force. It should be the driving force of that IEP.
It's a lot of data, and for one child, it looks like a huge packet. But you take all the data and that baseline data is what it's called. Trend data is what we call it too. And you lay it all out kind of like in a spreadsheet. All the testing reports from the ETR, all the baseline data, and you say, here's where the child is with the skill they're struggling. And the IEP is a plan where, as the team, those people that gave those tests through the ETR process, they can then say, okay, based upon your child's disability, he might need 30 minutes of speech a week, or he might need 120 minutes of speech a week, depending on the severity of the disability. And then we bring those specialists in. They all explain to the parent, here's the services I'm going to be providing to your child. Here's how often I'm going to be providing them. Are you okay with that?
SDI, or specially designed instruction, is how the instruction that we're giving looks different compared to our typical peers. So small group instruction, using manipulatives, using touch points, that's all specially designed instruction that would be geared towards a math. So it's what the instruction looks like.
Inclusion means my child is going to be included to the best possible ability in the general ed curriculum. And that's always the goal, least restrictive environment. Where can I put your child that is the most typical, but they're going to learn the best? So, for instance, if my child's diagnosed with a simple reading disability, she could be pulled out 30 minutes a day to work with an interventionist, and she's in her general ed classroom the rest of the day. There are other IEP students who are in the classroom all day, and the interventionist comes to them and maybe pulls a small group of students who need the same skill within the classroom.
It is a yearly review, so it takes place every year, and where they're reevaluating, looking at the needs of the student and developing goals and objectives to help assist the students make gains.
Although I tell parents they should understand they can ask for an IEP meeting whenever they think it's necessary. And sometimes the school will actually contact the family and request an IEP meeting. So for some kids, they're going to do really great and they're going to blow through their goals and make lots of progress. And if they do that, we want to make sure that we come back to the table and we identify new goals. Other kids may be having problems, and if they are, we want to make sure we address those as well. So whenever either party thinks there's a need to have an IEP meeting, we can do that. It's not written in stone.
So that goal would be set until the parent comes in, and then we sign off again. It's always a signature. And as soon as the parent signs off and says, I want this goal changed, or the team says as a team, this needs to be fixed, the document changes. It's a working document.
There are multiple people responsible for meeting and deciding supports and services that should be implemented at school to best support the student. These members of the IEP team include the parents of the student once they are of age, the general education teacher who is knowledgeable of the grade level curriculum and in most cases will be the person responsible for implementing accommodations in the classroom, the special education teacher who in most cases is responsible for implementing services through the IEP, school administrator who can ensure that the IEP is implemented, and evaluation personnel who can explain and interpret student data, and sometimes other people are invited who are knowledgeable of the student, and these people may include family friends or a lawyer. It should also be noted that the initial IEP meeting should occur within 60 days from the date that the student was referred. During the evaluation process, it is important that the team gathers information on the student's present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. This information is used to write the PLAF statement in the IEP, based on what the team has discovered about the student's current level of performance and learning. While collecting this information, the team should determine the impact of the disability on the student's learning. This information about the student can be gathered from a number of different sources, such as a team member coming to observe the student in their classroom environment, assessment data, and interviews with the parents. The PLAF statement should include the current levels the student is working at academically and functionally, as well as a description of their strengths and needs. Now we will cover important parts of the IEP. One important piece is the student's annual goals and short-term objectives. The student's annual goals are developed based on their current levels of performance taken from the PLAF. Like most goals, these goals should be measurable and something the student can achieve within one academic year. The goals should also be inclusive in that they give students access to the general education curriculum. Special education teachers are responsible for providing parents with their child's progress toward the goals at each grading period. Along with annual goals, there are short-term objectives, which are stepping stones toward achieving a goal. These short-term objectives should be achievable during each grading period. Another part of the IEP is a description of the special education services the student will receive. Once it is determined that a student is qualified to receive an IEP, individualized supports are provided for the student to assist them in achieving their annual goals. In accordance with the principle of inclusion in special education, the student's IEP should state the extent to which the disability affects the student's ability to learn and participate in the general education classroom. If the student needs to be removed from their general education classroom, there should be a statement indicating why in their IEP. An IEP should give a description of the services, including how often services should be provided and for how long each session will take place, where the services will be provided, and when the services will start and finish. Furthermore, the IEP team should decide what accommodations the student needs in order to take yearly standardized assessments. Once a student reaches age 16 or 14 and a half in Illinois, the IEP team should plan to state what supports the students will receive in the transition process. Transition services help students to prepare to transition to adult life after school. This plan should take into consideration the student's strengths and interests. Some examples of supports that students may receive in the transition plan are assistance in getting a job or becoming employed, assistance with living independently, assistance with applying and getting into colleges, and assistance with community experiences. It should also be noted that the rights and responsibilities of special education services are transferred to the student once they are 18 years old. Another part of the IEP is the extended school year. The extended school year should not be confused with summer school, but instead, they are free services that can be provided to students with an IEP outside of the school day or school year. Details of these services must be stated in the student's IEP. Furthermore, these services can be provided at home, at the school, or in the community. The purpose of extended school year is to prevent the loss of knowledge or skills. There are other aspects that should be considered when creating an IEP. If the student is a second language learner, the team should take into account the student's linguistic abilities and what language supports the student needs. If the student has a visual impairment, the IEP should include the instruction and use of Braille at school, unless this is not appropriate for the child. For students who are hard of hearing, the IEP team must consider the student's communication needs with others at school. Assistive technology consists of high-tech and low-tech devices. AT helps students with disabilities perform a skill that they otherwise might not be able to do. The team should consider appropriate AT for all students with an IEP. If the student has a disability that falls in the autism spectrum, the IEP team should consider their verbal and nonverbal communication needs, the need to develop social skills, the need related to sensory experiences, and the needs as a result in change in routine or behavioral supports. After the first IEP meeting and implementation, once a year, the IEP team should meet to discuss the student and review his or her IEP. At this time, the team can revise, update, and make changes to the student's IEP if needed. The goals that the student has can be updated based on their individual needs and the progression they have made with the curriculum. The parents of the student should attend this meeting and be active members in this process.